"I won't let you have him." The words were a reedy gasp, torn from a throat raw with hunger and cold. Ilara's body, frail and shaking, was jammed into the hollow of a rotting log, shielding the small, silver-furred creature huddled against her chest. The wolf cub trembled, its tiny whines muffled by her threadbare coat. Outside, the heavy, booted footsteps stopped. A man laughed, a cruel, sharp sound that cut through the frozen air. "Look at this, boys, the general's disgrace, playing mother to a shifter mutt." A steel-toed boot kicked the log, jarring Ilara's teeth. "Give it here, girl. The bounty's the same, dead or alive, and the general pays extra for the pups." Wait! Before the next revelation unfolds, if this mystery has already captivated you, let us know where you're following this story from. To ensure you don't miss unexpected claims, broken bonds, or awakenings under the moon, subscribe and stay close. Now, back to the scene. Ilara pressed herself deeper into the decaying wood, the smell of damp earth and her own fear filling her lungs. "No," she whispered, her voice cracking. The cub, Rory, nuzzled deeper, his small claws snagging her shirt. He was an alpha's son. She could feel the nascent power humming off him, a warmth she hadn't felt in a year. It was that power the hunters had tracked. The leader, a scarred man named Jax, crouched down, his face too close to the opening. He reeked of stale sweat and the metallic tang of silver. "You're just like your mother," he sneered, his eyes glinting. "Weak-hearted, pathetic. Your father did the world a favor casting you out." He reached in, his gloved hand grabbing for the cub. Ilara reacted with a desperation born of starvation and a lifetime of being called weak. She bit him. Her teeth, surprisingly sharp, sank into the flesh of his hand. Jax roared in pain and fury, yanking his hand back. "Witch!" he spat, drawing a long silver-laced knife. "I got you both!" He raised the knife, the polished metal catching the sliver of moonlight that pierced the canopy. Ilara flinched, curling her body tighter over Rory, bracing for the impact that would end her miserable existence. It never came. A sound ripped through the forest, a roar so deep and primal it vibrated in Ilara's bones. It was not the sound of a man or a beast she knew, but of something ancient and enraged. A shadow, massive and black, exploded from the trees. It was a wolf, but a wolf that stood as tall as a horse, its eyes burning like twin gold flames in the dark. It slammed into Jax with the force of a battering ram, the sound of snapping bone sharp and terrible. The other two hunters, frozen in shock, barely had time to raise their rifles before the black wolf was on them. It was a whirlwind of black fur and flashing claws, a brutal, efficient massacre that was over in seconds. Ilara watched, her heart hammering against her ribs, her breath caught in her throat. The clearing fell silent, broken only by the whimpering of the cub in her arms and the wet dripping of blood onto the snow. The massive black wolf stood over the last hunter's body, its chest heaving. It turned its head, those molten gold eyes pinning her in the hollow of the log. It took a step toward her, and Ilara squeezed her eyes shut, praying for a death as quick as the hunters had received. A strange crackling sound of shifting bones and tearing fabric made her open them. The wolf was gone. In its place stood a man. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and radiated an aura of raw, terrifying power that dwarfed the hunters. He was naked to the waist despite the freezing cold, his skin crisscrossed with old scars. Dark hair was plastered to his head with sweat and blood. He stared at her, his expression unreadable, his golden eyes, the same as the wolf's, fixed on the bundle in her arms. He took a step. "My son." His voice was a low growl, rough as gravel.
Ilara's arms tightened instinctively around Rory. The cub peeked out and let out a small, happy yip, squirming to get to the man. His yours?" she stammered. The man ignored her. He crouched, his movements fluid and predatory, and held out his arms. "Rory, come." The cub scrambled from Ilara's grasp and bounded into the man's arms, licking at the blood on his father's chin. The man's hard features softened almost imperceptibly as he tucked the cub against his chest. His gaze then snapped back to Ilara, all warmth vanishing. "Who are you?" "Ilara." She crawled out of the log, her limbs shaking so badly she could barely stand. Now that the adrenaline was gone, the cold was seeping back in, a bone-deep ache. I found him. The hunters were tracking him." The alpha, he could be nothing else, looked at the bodies of the hunters, then back at her. He noted her torn clothes, the gauntness of her cheeks, the fresh blood on her lip from where she'd bitten Jax. "You're human," he stated. It was not a question. It was an accusation. "And you smell of him." Ilara flinched. He was my father." The alpha's eyes narrowed. "General Vorlog." The name was a curse on his tongue. He knew her father. Of course he did. Her father hunted shifters for sport, for power, for the sheer hatred of them. "You are the general's daughter." "He cast me out," Ilara said quickly, desperation making her voice thin. "A year ago, I'm nothing to him, I swear." The alpha, Kale, studied her. His wolf was quiet for the first time in days, sniffing the air. The female was human, yes, but she reeked of starvation, not deceit. And she carried the scent of his son, a scent of shared fear and comfort. She had shielded him, a human. The general's own blood had shielded his son. The irony was bitter. "You saved my heir," he said flatly. "The pack is in your debt." "I don't want a debt," Ilara whispered, wrapping her arms around her own thin body. I couldn't let them take him." Kale's gaze softened, just a fraction. He saw her shaking, the blue tinge of her lips. She was starving, freezing. She wouldn't last another night out here. His son, Rory, was whining again, reaching a small paw toward Ilara. "Hush, little one," Kale murmured, before looking at her again. "You cannot stay here. Your father's men will be back, and now they know where to look." "I have nowhere else to go," she admitted, the shame of it burning her throat. Kale made a decision. It was impulsive, driven by the debt and by the strange, insistent pull his son was exhibiting toward this frail human. "You will come with us." Ilara's head snapped up. To your pack?" "You protected my blood. You are under my protection now," he growled, intolerant of argument. He pulled the thick fur cloak from one of the dead hunters, a spoil of a previous shifter kill, and threw it at her. It was heavy and smelled of dried blood, but it was warm. "Wrap yourself. We move fast." Ilara hesitated for only a second. Go with the shifters, the monsters her father had taught her to fear? Or stay here and freeze to death, or worse, be found by her father's army? She looked at the small, silver cub in the alpha's arms, who was now watching her with intelligent, curious eyes. She pulled the cloak on. "Okay." Kale nodded once. "Stay close. If you fall behind, I will not wait for you." He turned and melted into the trees, a powerful, silent predator. Ilara, clutching the heavy cloak around her, scrambled to follow, leaving the hollow log, the dead hunters, and the last vestiges of her old life behind. The journey to the pack's den was a blur of terror and exhaustion. Kale moved with a speed that was not human, even carrying his son. Ilara's lungs burned, her legs felt like lead, and the hunter's cloak kept snagging on branches. Twice she fell, and twice Kale stopped, his golden eyes impatient in the dark, waiting for her to scramble back to her feet. He did not offer a hand. He simply watched, his presence a silent, intimidating demand. Keep up. When she thought she would collapse, they stopped. Ilara leaned against a massive pine, gasping for air, her vision spotting. Kale was watching a sheer rock face, his head tilted. "We are here," he said. He walked to a curtain of ancient ivy and pulled it aside, revealing a dark fissure in the rock, just wide enough for a man to pass. Warm, savory air, smelling of roasting meat and wood smoke, wafted out. Ilara's stomach cramped in a painful, desperate clench. Kale grunted, "Come." She followed him into the darkness. The tunnel was short, opening into a vast, fire-lit cavern. It was magnificent. The stone walls soared up to a high, vaulted ceiling, where a natural fissure acted as a chimney. The floor was covered in thick firs, and alcoves carved into the walls served as private dens. Several shifters in human form looked up as they entered. All conversation stopped. The air, which had seemed so welcoming, turned thick with hostility. All eyes landed on Ilara, on her human clothes, her human scent. "Alpha," a man stepped forward. He was leaner than Kale, with sharp features and cold, assessing eyes. "What is this?" "This is Ilara," Kale said, his voice booming in the cavern. He walked to the central fire and held up his son. She protected Rory from Vorlog's hunters. She saved his life. A murmur went through the crowd, but the sharp-featured man, Silas, Kale's beta, did not look impressed. He stepped closer, his gaze sweeping over Ilara's frail form. "She is human, Kale. Worse, she is his." He spat the word. "She's the general's whelp. I'd know that face anywhere." "She is an outcast," Kale stated, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "And she is under my protection. She bled for my son." "Or she's a lure," Silas shot back. "A spy, a trap. How convenient that she was there just when the hunters found him." "Enough." Kale's command was absolute. The cavern fell silent. "She will stay. She will be fed, and she will be given a place to rest. That is my word." He looked at an older woman stirring a pot over the fire. "Marta, see to her." Marta nodded, her expression wary but not unkind. Kael turned and stalked away toward a larger alcove, his son in his arms, leaving Ilara to face the hostile stares of the pack. She felt smaller and weaker than she ever had in the forest. Marta ladled a thick, hearty stew into a wooden bowl and handed it to her. "Eat," she ordered, not unkindly. Ilara's hands shook so badly she almost dropped it. She retreated to the darkest corner she could find, away from the prying eyes, and devoured the stew. It was the best thing she had ever tasted. The warmth spread through her, fighting back the chill that had lived in her bones for a year. When she was done, Marta gave her a thin blanket and pointed to an empty, shallow alcove near the entrance. "You sleep there." It was the guard's post, Ilara realized. The coldest, most exposed spot. A place for an outsider. She didn't care. She curled up, pulling the thin blanket and the heavy fur cloak over her, and fell into an exhausted sleep, the sounds of the pack's distrustful whispers her lullaby. She woke to a small, warm weight on her chest. Ilara's eyes flew open. Rory, the alpha's cub, was curled up on top of her blankets, purring like a kitten. He'd apparently slipped away from his father. Ilara's heart did a strange, painful lurch. She gently stroked his silver fur. He yipped in his sleep and snuggled closer.
He likes you. Elara jumped. Kyle was standing over her, his arms crossed over his massive chest. He was dressed now in simple leather trousers and a tunic. In the firelight, he was even more intimidating. He shouldn't be here, Elara whispered, trying to nudge Rory off without waking him. He goes where he wills, Kyle said. He is my son. He crouched, his golden eyes fixed on her. You slept. I was tired. You were safe, he corrected.
For the first time in a long time, I'd wager. He watched her, his gaze intense. Silas does not trust you. I know. Elara sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. Rory grumbled but stayed put. Should he? Kale almost smiled. No, he is my beta. It is his job to distrust. It is my job to know the truth. Why did you save him? Elara looked down at the cub. He was a child. He was scared. The hunters, they're monsters. It doesn't matter if they're hunting shifters or anything else. They enjoy the pain. And your father? Kale's voice was soft, dangerous. Is he a monster? Elara's throat tightened. She thought of the last time she'd seen him. He'd backhanded her for giving a piece of her own bread to a beggar. Weakness is a disease, Elara, and I will cut it from my bloodline. Yes, she whispered, the admission costing her. He is. Kale studied her, seeing the shadows under her eyes, the old faded bruise on her cheekbone. He saw the truth of her words. Your mother, he said. She was not from his line, was she? Elara looked up, shocked. How did you know? You don't carry the stench of him. Not really, Kale said, rising. There is something else in your blood, something old, something he would have hated. He looked at his son, now fast asleep on her lap. He is safe with you. For now. You will stay in my den. You will earn your keep. Marta needs help with the furs and the cooking. It was a dismissal. Elara nodded, her heart hammering. She was to stay in the alpha's personal den, not the communal cave. She watched him walk away, his presence commanding the entire cavern. She looked down at Rory, who'd chosen her, a weak, outcast human, as his protector. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving. She had a purpose. The next few days were a strange new rhythm. Elara worked alongside Marta, scraping hides, mending tunics, and stirring the communal pot. The work was hard, her hands quickly becoming chapped and raw, but the food was regular and the warmth of the fire constant. The pack kept its distance. They didn't threaten her. Cal's protection was absolute, but they watched her with suspicion. Silas, in particular, seemed to track her every move, his cold eyes missing nothing. Her only true companion was Rory. The cub was inseparable from her. He followed her around the cavern, slept at her feet, and often refused to eat unless Elara was the one to give him his bowl. Cal watched this, his expression thoughtful. He rarely spoke to her, but she felt his gaze constantly. It was heavy, assessing, and something else she couldn't name. A strange tension existed between them, a dangerous, unspoken awareness. He was the alpha, a being of primal power, and she was the human he had inexplicably brought into his home. One evening, Elara was sitting by the fire mending one of Rory's small tunics when Cal sat down across from her. The pack gave them a wide berth. You are good with him, Cal said, his voice a low rumble. He's easy to be good to, Elara replied, not looking up from her sewing. His mother was killed by hunters, Cal said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. A year ago, the same time your father cast you out. Elara's hand stilled. She looked up, meeting his golden arms. She saw the grief he kept locked down, a vast, cold ocean of it. I'm sorry, she whispered. They used silver-tipped arrows.
It was slow. He said it not for sympathy, but as a statement of fact. Rory hasn't bonded with anyone since. Not even me, not truly. But he bonded with you, in a single night. I don't know why. My wolf thinks it knows, Cal said, leaning forward slightly. The firelight played over the hard planes of his face. It says your scent is familiar, like something from the old songs. My wolf is rarely wrong. Ilara's heart skipped. I don't know what you mean. I'm just Ilara.
"You're the general's daughter," Silas' voice cut in. He stepped into the firelight, his face a mask of contempt. "And your father is getting close." Cale rose to his feet in one fluid motion. "What did you find?" "A patrol. Dead," Silas said, his eyes fixed on Ilara. 2 miles from here, torn apart by a wolf. "But they left this." He tossed something onto the ground between them. It was a military-issue comms device. "His men are probing. They're looking for us. And I'll wager they're looking for her." Ilara scrambled to her feet. I didn't." "You led them here," Silas snarled, taking a step toward her. "You're a beacon, his spy." "Silas!" Cale's roar silenced him. Cale looked at the comms device, then at Ilara. The doubt was back in his eyes, a flicker of cold suspicion. "Did you know they were this close?" "No, I swear!" Ilara cried, her voice desperate. "I would never!" Rory is the perfect bait," Silas countered, his voice venomous. "The general gets his disobedient daughter back, and the alpha's heir as a prize. A perfect trap." "She is under my protection," Cale said, but his voice lacked the iron certainty it had held before. He was torn. His duty as alpha, to protect his pack, was at war with the debt he owed her, and with the strange, inexplicable pull he felt. "Your protection is going to get us all killed," Silas said. "We need to move the den, and we need to get rid of her." "No," Cale said, "we don't run. This is our home." He looked at Ilara, his gaze hard. "You will stay in my den. You will not leave my sight." It wasn't for her protection anymore. It was for his pack's. She was a prisoner. The weight of his suspicion was heavier than a year of starvation. Ilara's eyes burned with tears, but she refused to let them fall. "I am not a traitor, Cale," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "I protected your son. I would die before I let my father find this place." Cale just stared at her, his face an unreadable mask of stone. "We shall see," he said. "The full moon is in 3 nights. His armies favor the light. If they are coming, they will come then." He turned to his beta. "Silas, double the patrols. Scent the perimeter. I want to know if a single human rat steps foot in our territory." Silas nodded, casting one last look of hatred at Ilara before disappearing into the shadows. Ilara was left alone by the fire, the warmth of the flames unable to touch the ice that had just formed in her heart. Kyle, the man who had saved her, the father of the child she had come to love, thought she was a spy. The sanctuary she had found had just become a cage. The next 3 days were agonizing. The den buzzed with a nervous, angry energy. Every shifter was on edge, sharpening blades, preparing for a fight. Ilara was confined to Kyle's personal den, a large alcove set deeper into the mountain. Kyle was a constant, silent presence. He barely spoke to her, but she felt his eyes on her always, watching, waiting for her to make a mistake, to reveal her treason. Rory was the only one who treated her normally,
He seemed oblivious to the tension, still curling up in her lap, still demanding she tell him the stories her own mother had once told her. Stories of forest spirits and moon magic. Ilara told them, her voice hollow, her heart breaking a little more each time Kael's shadow fell over them. He would watch her, his expression torn, as his son showed affection to the woman who might be their doom. On the third night, the night of the full moon, a howl echoed from the ridges above. It was not a pack howl. It was a warning. Kael was on his feet instantly. "Stay here," he commanded Ilara. "Don't move." He grabbed a massive sword from the wall and was gone. Ilara's heart hammered. She could hear shouting from the main cavern. She went to the entrance of the den, her hands clenched. Rory was whimpering behind her. She could see the shifters grabbing weapons. Silas was directing them, his voice sharp.
"To the entrance! Hold the line! Don't let them breach the tunnel!" Then she heard it, a sound she knew from her childhood. The rhythmic, pounding march of disciplined soldiers, the metallic shing of silver-laced armor. Her father's army. They were here. They had found the den. "No," Ilara whispered, horror draining the blood from her face. "I didn't tell them. I didn't. How?" A sudden, jarring thought hit her. The comms device, the one Silas had found. He didn't find it. He planted it. Silas had been so convinced she was a spy, so desperate to get rid of her. Had he led them here himself to prove his point, to force Kael's hand? Before she could process the thought, Kael stalked back into the den. His face was a mask of cold fury, his golden eyes blazing with a betrayal so profound it struck Ilara dumb. "They are here," he snarled. "Kael, you were a spy," he whispered, his voice shaking with rage. He grabbed her arm, his fingers biting into her flesh like a steel trap. "All of it, a lie. You used my son. You used me." "No, Kael, listen to me," Ilara cried, trying to pull away. "It wasn't me. I think it was Silas. "Silence," he roared. He dragged her from the den into the main cavern. The pack was in chaos, fighting a losing battle at the tunnel entrance. Soldiers in her father's black and silver armor were pushing their way in, their silver blades flashing. "Alpha!" Silas yelled, his face grim. "There are too many. We can't hold the tunnel." "Seal it," Kael commanded. "Bring it down." He looked at Ilara, his eyes dead. They want the general's daughter? They can have her. He began to drag her toward the fighting. "No! Kael, listen to me!" Ilara screamed, digging her heels in. "Kael, you're wrong! Please!" "General, we have her!" Kael roared, his voice cutting through the din of battle. The soldiers at the front faltered, their commander looking back. A new voice, amplified and cold, echoed through the cavern. It came from a comms unit on the commander's shoulder.
"Excellent, Alpha. A wise decision." Ilara froze. She knew that voice. It haunted her nightmares. "Father," she breathed. "Daughter," the voice of General Vorlag replied, chilling her to the bone. "You have been a most useful little lure. Your weakness has finally served a purpose. Surrender the Alpha's heir, and I will grant you a quick death. Defy me, and I will burn that entire den to the ground with you in it." The world stopped. Kael's hand on her arm went slack. He stared at her, his face a canvas of dawning, horrified realization. Surrender the Alpha's heir? He hadn't come for her. He'd used her. He'd used his own daughter as bait to find the child.
He looked at Silas, who was watching with a grim, tight-lipped expression, then back at Ilara. He saw the utter devastation in her eyes, the terror, the truth. He used me," Ilara whispered, tears finally breaking free, streaming down her face. "He knew I was here. He knew I would protect Rory. He hunted his own grandson." Cal's rage, which had been directed at her, now pivoted, turning into a white-hot inferno. He had been wrong, so terribly, fatally wrong. He had believed Silas. He had accused her. And her father? Her father was a monster beyond his darkest imaginings. He shoved Ilara behind him, placing his body between her and the soldiers. "He doesn't get either of you," Cal growled, his voice a promise of death. He raised his sword. "Pack, to me! We hold nothing back! Drive them out!" He let out a primal roar and charged, not as a man, but as an alpha, protecting his territory, his son, and his mate. The word echoed in his own mind, stunning him. Mate. His wolf, which had been agitated and confused for days, suddenly settled, its voice clear and absolute. Ours. Protect. Claim. The cavern exploded into a frenzy of violence. Cal was a demigod of war, his massive sword a blur of silver-smeared steel. He moved with the grace of the wolf and the fury of the alpha, cutting down soldier after soldier. The pack, galvanized by his roar, surged forward, fighting with a desperation Ilara had never seen. She was frozen for a moment, the sound of mate ringing in her ears, her father's cold words still echoing in the air. Rory was crying, huddled in the back of the den. Silas was fighting near the entrance, his face grim. He'd been wrong about her, but he was loyal to his alpha. "He used me." Her father's betrayal was a cold, hard stone in her gut. He hadn't cast her out because she was weak. He'd cast her out because she wasn't useful. And now he'd found a use for her. Bait. A new kind of anger, cold and sharp, cut through her fear. She looked at the battle, at the shifters dying to protect their home from her father. She saw Cale take a slice to his arm, the silver blade leaving a smoking sizzle. He didn't even flinch. "No more," Ilara whispered. She wouldn't be the lure. She wouldn't be the weakling. She grabbed a fallen shifter's hunting knife from the floor. It was heavy, balanced. She looked at the fight, not as a victim, but as the general's daughter. She'd spent 18 years at her father's side, forced to watch his tactical briefings, to study his maps. She'd absorbed it all, hating every minute of it. But now... "Cale!" she screamed. He glanced back, his eyes wild. "The tunnel! They're reinforcing the tunnel, but they're leaving their flank exposed by the north vent. He always overcommits his entry team." Cale's eyes widened. He'd forgotten about the narrow ventilation shaft, barely big enough for a wolf. "Silas," he roared, "take 3, the north vent, now!" Silas nodded, peeling off from the main fight. Ilara ran to Marta, who was trying to shield Rory and the other cubs. "Get them to the emergency tunnel," Ilara ordered, her voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "But Alpha," Marta began. "He needs every fighter."
"Go!" Ilara shoved them toward the hidden exit. Rory reached for her, crying. "I'll come back, little one," she promised, her heart tearing. "I promise." She pushed him into Marta's arms. She turned back to the fight. Her father's soldiers were pushing in, a disciplined phalanx of shields and silver spears. The shifters were powerful, but the confined space and the silver weapons were tipping the balance. Cale was at the center, a whirlwind of death, but he was tiring, the silver poison from his wound slowing him.
A soldier broke through the line, his eyes landing on Ilara. "The target!" he yelled, raising his spear and charging at her. Ilara didn't run. She stood her ground, the knife gripped tight. She remembered her father's lessons. Never meet force with force. Use their momentum against them. As the soldier lunged, she dropped, sweeping her leg out, catching his ankle. He bellowed in surprise, tumbling forward. Ilara was on him in an instant, driving the knife down into the gap in his armor at the neck. It was brutal, messy, and terrifyingly easy. She pulled the knife free, her hand shaking, but her resolve hardening. She looked up and met Kale's gaze across the cavern. He was staring at her, his golden eyes wide with shock and a new, fierce admiration. "Ilara!" Her father's voice, not amplified this time. He was here. General Vorlag stepped through the ranks of his soldiers, clapping slowly. He was encased in black, silver-etched armor, his face impassive. "I see you finally learned to kill. Perhaps there's a spine in you yet." You monster!" Ilara spat, rising to her feet. "He's your grandson." "He is a beast," Vorlag said, his voice flat. "A contamination, just like your mother." He drew his own sword, a magnificent, cruel-looking blade of rippling, silver-laced steel. "I have come to cleanse my bloodline. First the half-breed, then the whelp who protected it." He lunged at her. He was impossibly fast. Ilara barely had time to raise her knife. The force of his blow sent her staggering back, her arms screaming in pain. "Pathetic," he sneered, raising his sword for the killing blow. "No!" Kale's roar was pure, primal rage. He launched himself across the cavern, slamming into the general with all his alpha strength. The two men crashed against the stone wall, Kale's claws, now partially shifted, tearing at the general's armor, his fangs bared. But Vorlag was a seasoned warrior. He fought with cold, tactical precision, his silver blade finding purchase again and again, slicing into Kale's arms and chest. Kale roared in pain as the silver burned, but his fury and his drive to protect Ilara were stronger. Ilara watched, helpless, as her father, the man who represented all her pain, and Kale, the man who had become her everything, fought to the death. She had to help. She looked around, desperate. Her eyes landed on the central fire pit, on the heavy iron pot of stew Marta had abandoned. Use their momentum. She ran, grabbing the pot's handle. It was scorching hot, searing her hands, but she didn't care. With a scream of pure, unadulterated rage, she swung the pot, slinging the boiling hot stew directly at her father's face. Vorlag, his sword raised to deliver a final fatal blow to Kale, roared in agony as the scalding liquid hit his face. He dropped his sword, clawing at his helmet to get it off. It was the opening Kale needed. With a final, explosive surge of power, he shifted. Not fully, but his arms, his chest, his face exploded into the half-form of the wolf. He was a terrifying, furred beast of muscle and claw. He drove his claws, now 4 inches long and hard as steel, straight through the gap in Vorlag's armor, impaling him. General Vorlag stiffened. His hands dropped from his face, which was now a raw, red map of burns. He looked down at the black-furred arm buried in his chest. "Weakness," he gurgled, a bloody froth on his lips, "is a disease." "No," Kyle growled, his voice a guttural mix of man and wolf. He leaned in, his hot breath on the general's face. "It's a mirror, and you've been looking at yourself for too long." He ripped his claws free. General Vorlag collapsed, his armor clattering on the stone floor. He was dead.
The cavern fell silent. The remaining soldiers, seeing their general fall, froze. Silas and his wolves emerged from the north vent behind them, cutting off their retreat. The fight was over. The soldiers dropped their weapons, surrendering. Ilara stood panting, her hands blistered and shaking, her body bruised. Kyle turned to her. He was bleeding from a dozen silver wounds, his form still rippling between man and wolf. He walked toward her, each step heavy. He stopped in front of her. She looked up at him, at this terrifying, magnificent creature who had just saved her life. He reached out a hand, his claws still extended, and gently, so gently, brushed a lock of matted hair from her face. Then his eyes rolled back, and he collapsed at her feet. "Kyle!" Ilara screamed, dropping to her knees. The silver poisoning, held at bay by adrenaline and rage, was taking him. "No! No! You can't!" Silas was at her side in an instant. "Alpha! Kyle!" He looked at the smoking, black-edged wounds. "The silver! It's too deep! We can't stop it!" "Yes, we can," Ilara said, her voice fierce. She looked at her own hands, blistered and raw from the pot. A strange, cool feeling was spreading from her palms, dulling the pain. "Your mother's blood. Something old." "Marta!" Ilara yelled. "Bring me moon moss and silver ash, now!" Marta, who had returned from the tunnel, stared. "But that's for the death rites." "It's for healing," Ilara snapped, her voice carrying an authority that made the older woman jump. "And bring me the hottest water you can find." She cradled Kyle's massive head in her lap. "Stay with me, you stupid wolf," she whispered, her tears dripping onto his face.
"You don't get to call me mate and then die. I don't allow it." Marta returned with the supplies. Ilara ignored the pain in her hands, grinding the moss and ash into a paste. She dipped a cloth in the steaming water and, ignoring Silas' hiss of protest, pressed it directly onto one of Kale's wounds. He convulsed, a low groan rising from his chest, but Ilara held firm. "The fire draws the silver," she muttered, the knowledge coming to her as if from a dream. Her mother's voice. "The moss soothes the flesh. The ash seals the spirit." She worked with a feverish intensity, cleaning and packing each wound. As she worked, a faint silvery light began to glow from her hands. It was subtle, barely there, but Silas saw it. His eyes went wide. Ilara wasn't just healing him, she was mending him. The tainted blood her father had so despised, the blood of a long-lost line of healers, was awakening. She worked for hours, long after the last soldier was bound and gagged, long after the den had fallen into an exhausted, grieving silence. She poured all of her will, all of her strange, nascent power into the man in her lap. Finally, as the first hint of dawn crept through the chimney fissure, Kale's breathing evened out. The black edges of his wounds faded, leaving clean, red lines. The fever broke. Ilara sat back, her strength completely gone. She slumped against the cavern wall, a bone-deep exhaustion claiming her. Kale's eyes flickered open. They were no longer wild, but clear, human, and fixed on her. "Ilara," he rasped. "You're an idiot," she whispered, her voice thick with relief. He managed a weak smile. "My wolf, good taste." Silas stepped forward, his face etched with shame. He dropped to one knee beside Ilara, bowing his head. "Luna," he said, his voice thick, "I was wrong. I am unforgivable." Ilara looked at him, then at Kale. "Help me get him to his den," she said. "Then we'll talk about forgiveness."
The pack, slowly gathering around, watched as Silas and Alara helped their alpha to his feet and half-carried him to his den. They watched her, their new Luna, her hands burned, her face smudged with soot and blood, her small, frail body supporting their leader. She was no longer the general's whelp, the human outcast. She was their savior. Days later, Alara was sitting by the fire, her hands bandaged. The den was quiet, healing. The captured soldiers had been dealt with, stripped of their armor and weapons and sent back with a message, carrying the head of General Vorlag. A message that the pack was no longer hiding. Kale walked out of his den, his steps steady. He was scarred but whole. He walked to Alara and sat beside her. He didn't speak for a long time, just watched the flames. Rory was already asleep in Alara's lap, his silver fur warm. "The light in your hands," Kale said finally, his voice low. "It was my mother's," Alara said. "I never knew. He told me she was weak, that she died of a fever. He must have been lying." "He lied about everything," Kale said. He gently took her bandaged hand in his massive one. "You are not weak, Alara. You are the strongest person I have ever known. You faced down your father. You saved my pack. You saved me. We saved each other," Alara whispered, looking up at him. He leaned in, his golden eyes soft, and finally, after all the blood and fear and betrayal, he kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, but of promise. It was a kiss of healing, of homecoming. It was the alpha claiming his mate. "You are pack," he murmured against her lips. "You are Luna. You are mine." Alara closed her eyes, leaning into his strength. She was no longer cold, no longer starving, no longer an outcast. She was surrounded by the warmth of the fire, the weight of the child in her lap, and the solid, protective presence of her mate. She was home.